Welcome everyone to the American Heritage Center. Thank you guys for coming out today. I'm going to say just a couple of things before I talk about our speaker today. If you haven't gotten a chance to look at the exhibit that's currently up, the West is Waiting, an exploration of railroad advertising, and the companion exhibit, Life Between the Rails and Oral History Project, please make sure that you wander around and check those out. We are taking down the Life Between the Rails exhibit on Monday, and it will be finding a new home over at the Lincoln Community Center over in West Laramie.
Oh, nice.
And then the railroad exhibit out here in the exhibit hall comes down at the beginning, like first or second week of April. So make sure you check those out. Also, please join us on Tuesday, March 24th at 5:30. We're welcoming Dr. Cecily Zander, an assistant professor of history here at UW, for her talk, Binding the Nation, Civil War Politics and the Promise of the Pacific Railroad. She's going to be talking about the idea of the Transcontinental Railroad pretty soon after the Civil War. So please join us for that. Okay, those are my announcements. But now on to our speaker for today. So here at the AHC, we've got a lot of special donors who've contributed to our collections over the years. But one of the first that comes to my mind is our friend, Jim Ehernberger. Jim's been donating to the AHC since about 1999, and to date has donated nearly 700 cubic feet of transportation-related material here to the AHC. If you have a hard time picturing it like I do, if you've ever seen a banker's box, imagine 700 of those filled to the brim with material. That does not include his book collection that's housed in the Tompkin Rare Books Library. I don't even know how many books Jim has donated over the years, but it is a significant number. So he has donated lots of very, very important materials to us here at the AHC, and for that we thank him. Most of it centers around trains, but it also includes including Jim's own collection with photography that he's taken throughout the years. But it also encompasses automobiles, planes, buses, and other various types of transportation. So on that note, we are joined by Jim today, whose talk is going to center on these various modes of transportation, where he's going to kind of discuss the rise and fall of the passenger rail throughout the 20th century. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Jim Ehernberger.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to do this. The collection consists all the way back to stagecoaches, perhaps whatever was available. And I look at some of these westerns, and I see a stagecoach with Wells Fargo or something like that. You know, a stagecoach only had really comfortable, if it was comfortable, six people. So there's a change of an era, because the stagecoach was 6 people and 6 horses pulling it. And the railroad came, and they had passenger cars that could seat 50 or 60 people. What a difference. You can see how, and also the ride with the passenger train on the rails, even though in 1867, when the first train arrived Cheyenne, they built the railroad hastily, but they still made 25 miles an hour, where a stagecoach couldn't do that. So it was a transition, and put a lot of stage operations out of business, but it was the future. Progressive. That's what happened here to the passenger train. We'll start with this. In the original passenger cars were all wood construction. They had open platforms, coal stoves and oil lamps. However, they did ride good as long as the track conditions were good. And as time went on, they improved the passenger cars with steel cars because they had a lot of trouble with those old wooden cars. If they had a wreck, they would telescope, and they had a lot of fatalities. They also, sometimes when they had a derailment, the coal stove would tip over and the car would catch on fire, and could be some fatalities in addition to what may have happened during the accident. So by building steel cars, it prevented a lot of that type injury situation on passenger trains. And but those cars are early. The wooden ones around 1900, the steel around 1910. But Henry Ford, we'll just have to place the blame on Henry Ford, because he came along and he was a visionary, and he created an automobile that was affordable. And the first Model T was produced in 1908. And after originally there was $850, and the Model T was well received because of the price was low, and everyone wanted an automobile because of the convenience. And you take the convenience of being able to go someplace, like, say you wanted to come over here like today. Well, if you had to wait for a train schedule, it might not have been until 1 o'clock this afternoon when we could come over at 8 in the morning. So it was convenient. And also the railroads promoted, the Burlington Railroad especially. I found a newspaper article from the early 1900s where they promoted good roads. Good roads was the key for the automobile age. This is a 1908 Model T. This is the Model S, actually. It was just prior to the T, but basically about the same. The only difference was some of the clutch arrangement. They say that Model T, I never did drive one, but it had 3 pedals, and it was a little difficult unless you got used to it. But the big problem for the automobile age early on was the condition of the roads, because when they started operating automobiles, they just went on the existing roads, the trails and whatever it was. Some of these had previously been for the stagecoach and so on. And of course, in addition, it was the weather conditions, because when there was muddy road conditions, it was a disaster. They just couldn't hardly ever navigate that. And so kind of like today, I think of it, we have a snowstorm or something that ties up Denver Airport. People are sleeping on the floor. People say, oh, we've got to have passenger trains. Well, it was the same way with the early automobile age. I read in a newspaper where the people couldn't get out because of the mud and the conditions of the road, so they would ride the train and fill up the train at that time, but as soon as the roads improved and got better, then they were back in their Model Ts. So anyway, the Model T was, they could use it for about anything. That's what was so good. They could, according to the material I received on this, they rigged it up with the back wheel so that they put a saw blade on it. They could saw wood, pump water, store grain, run stock, generate electricity in various ways, including hauling hay. So, no, it was versatile, very, very good. And Henry really did a good job there on that. And here in the 1920s, it could even operate on the railroad track for the executives, mostly inspection specials and things like that. Those wheels were just iron wheels, and another railroad had some of those that they had a lot of trouble with the iron wheels failing, which they changed them later to a pneumatic tire situation with a flange. As people were wanting better roads, and the longer they demanded better roads, and all of the early day editorials in the newspapers cried for better roads. In 1913 is when the Lincoln Highway Association was formed. And it was formed and became famous, well known from Times Square, New York City to San Francisco. 3,142 miles. Now, it was not a straight road. They used existing right-of-way and whatever they could get. In some places, I know in Nebraska, I haven't worked on, well, it's in the collection here now, but the Lincoln Highway went around the fields. Sometimes it didn't go straight across it because of ownership of land and so on. But here in Wyoming, right here west of Laramie, over out here at the place, there's a sign that says Howell. Take that road and you'll go down on the old Union Pacific right-of-way over to Bosworth. And that was used by the Lincoln Highway. And there's others, different places. They tried to utilize a lot of the old railroad grades because when Harriman came in 1897, one of the first things that he did, his goal was to relocate and straighten out the Union Pacific Railroad. Because originally, when it was built, they because of the type equipment, mostly mules and hand tools, then they took the easiest course and sometimes went around on a hillside or something like that. And when Harriman decided to take over the railroad and get the money for it, they straightened it out. There are places right here, just west of Laramie, between here and Medicine Bowl, where the old railroad grades are visible. And Herman died, he died in 1909. And by the time he died in 1909, the distance between Omaha and Ogden, Utah, that the Union Pacific saved by those line changes was 40 miles. Now stop and think, 40 miles, less maintenance, 40 miles, everything. The time, speed, they could speed up the schedules. And also but it was such an advantage. Everything that Harriman did was saving money. And it really was good. And but it did benefit the Lincoln Highway until 1926. Here in 1924, the 10 millionth Model T was in service, 10 million of them. And this production continued until 1927, and there's 15 million plus that was produced. The legend of Henry Ford and his famous Tin Lizzie will never die. I read that in a newspaper. And they even put cartoons out. And here's one of a couple people here, and he says, Doc, he says, if it's a boy, I'm going to name him Henry. Ford. If it's a girl, I'm going to name her Lizzie. So, and there are just dozens of cartoons on the Model Ts. Well, passenger trains were really nice in 1900, and this is a overland limited passenger train leaving Cheyenne. The Stimson photograph in about 1910. In 1927, the railroad annual reports indicated that passenger revenue losses, that there was a lot of passenger revenue losses. Here comes another one of my fan club from Cheyenne. And so because of those passenger revenue losses due to the hard surface pavements that were being added at that time, and of course, Model T and other automobiles, the convenience. You have to remember the automobile, even today, we have an investment in our cars. And that it's important that we use that car at our convenience. And we do use it at our convenience. We're spoiled because of that. Now, people tell me, they'll say, well, why don't we have passenger trains as they have in Europe? Well, they don't have the highway system that we have. They don't have the number of vehicles and ownership as what we have. And those railroads in Europe, the majority of them, as far as I know, are subsidized by the government. It's a different story because our railroad system are technically privately owned. You buy stock in the company, and so they're privately owned. They're not railroad owned or government owned. So that's the situation. But during that 1927 era, when I mentioned that the railroad annual reports was indicating loss of revenue, the railroads also had on the left there, you can see kind of a green self-propelled car, and that was called a motor car. So they put those on the railroad to replace steam trains, because a steam train, depending on how many cars, may have required an engineer, a fireman, a conductor, a head brakeman, and a rear brakeman. 5 people just in the operating crew. And then, of course, a steam engine required coal, required water, required maintenance. Steam locomotives are labor intensive. That's the reason why the railroads converted to diesels, is because of the fact that they were so labor intensive. And diesels could go much further and did not cost as much to operate. So the motor cars took place of a little passenger train on a lot of these branch lines or low revenue lines. It was all, and the Union Pacific had those operating until 1958 on some lines. Well, 1929 came, and everyone suffered on that, and the railroad was no exception. October 29th, 1929 was Black Tuesday, and that was the beginning of the Great Depression. Unemployment doubled in 1930, and railroad business suffered greatly. Not only passenger, but the freight traffic dropped considerably. So to make up for that, the Union Pacific was a pioneer in developing the streamlined passenger train. It was a lightweight, built out of aluminum, known as tomorrow's train today, and it provided more comfort, faster schedules from Chicago to the West Coast cities. Now, the first one, actually, it was just a little 3-car train initially. They took it around and had it on display, let people walk through it and see it. And it was progress. It was progress. And that was the beginning. And after that, oops, I went the wrong one. This is the first one that had the lead unit, had a baggage section in it, and then 2 passenger cars. Initially, they placed this in service between Kansas City and Salina, Kansas. But after that, as soon as it went in service, they started other streamliners. Here was the city of Portland It took 39 3/4 hours to go from Chicago to Portland. And some of those, the city of Los Angeles, another 39 3/4 hours. Now, the railroads had competition. It wasn't just Union Pacific running these high class trains. It was the Santa Fe was really their largest competitor to Los Angeles. But so that's the way the transition went in this. And the city of Denver. And of course, the Burlington had their Zephyrs, and the Zephyr was the first diesel. See, the Union Pacific first train was the distillate, but the Zephyr, the Pioneer Zephyr, was a little train similar to our first streamliner, and it was diesel operated, stainless steel, by the way, where the Union Pacific one was aluminum. So they put on, of course, competition between Chicago and Denver. It was between the Union Pacific and the Denver and the Burlington. So the Union Pacific operated the city of Denver, and the Burlington had the Denver Zephyr on 16-hour schedules. But things started to change again. Here was the city of Denver. It was a slick train. Some of these were not preserved. We did not get into historic preservation of railroad equipment. Even right after World War II, it was not until closer to the 1950s. And it's unfortunate because some things should have been saved that was around, but money, that's all I can say. Another train they put on in the 1930s to save passenger service called the Challenger. And these trains went Chicago to California. They had a Los Angeles Challenger and a San Francisco Challenger. And of course, the thing that they advertised was that you could get a complete dinner for 35 cents. So it was very popular. And it wasn't as fast of a schedule as the Streamliner, but it still helped bring more passengers back to the rails. Then here's the San Francisco Calendar, and they advertised on this one that you could eat 3 meals on the first day for 90 cents, and breakfast was 25 cents. In 1955, the Chicago Northwestern, who was a partner with the Union Pacific, the contract between the two railroads was dissolved October 30th, 1955, and then Union Pacific then started using the Union Station where the Milwaukee operated from. The Northwestern had their own station in Chicago. But the Milwaukee faithfully did handle these trains fine, and passenger service was going pretty good in 1955, but that was about the peak of it because something started happening. Of course, the passenger trains, the railroads improved them so they had a lot more comfort, like leg rest seats, just like this, and beautiful lounge cars with good service. Pullman cars, sleeping cars with good service and pleasant, make the trip pleasant. And trainmen who pointed out scenery and different things along the way. And the Union Pacific established something that was the only railroad in the United States, and that's dome dining cars. You could sit up in the dome. It was a wonderful trip leaving Portland in the afternoon around 4:30, coming east along the Columbia River, viewing the Columbia River Gorge in a dome diner and having dinner. And the food was some of the best. Like they didn't spare anything on the food. Of course, people said it was too expensive, but yet it was high quality. It was wonderful. One of my favorite things on the Dome cars or Dome Diner or any of the railroad dining cars was French toast. They had the crispiest, nicest French toast. And there's something about it. I talked to somebody about that one time, and they told me that there was a secret. You have to be careful on French toast. It was in the egg batter and so on, and the bread is soggy. Well, what they did on the dining cars, it was thick toast, but they would put it in an oven for about 400 degrees for a little while to cook it. That's what they did. That's part of the secret. Of course, it had some stuff on it, like, maybe a little powdered sugar, or, all those good things. And there's prime rib. And that'd be a wonderful dinner today. But the thing that killed the passenger train really was the loss of the mail contract. Our last mail train through here in 1967 changed what we could do. Right here in Laramie, you could mail a letter, you could take it down to the depot, and if you put it on they had a railway post office car. It had post office employees on it, about 4 or 5. And there was a slot in the side, and you could put your letter in there for Cheyenne. And that letter was dropped off in Cheyenne, 50 miles away, and put in your post office box within about 2 or 3 hours. This very same day. Now, I don't know who thought the system we're doing today is progress. So, but the thing is, I found in 1959, they started writing a lot about the demise of the passenger service. And in this Trains magazine was one of them, says, "Who shot the passenger train?" And it was quite a story, and there's others in these magazines at that time. Well, for us here, the final blow was the loss of the mail contracts. The mail contracts provided subsidy for the passenger train. So we lost that mail service, our railway post office cars, in 1967, October of 1967. And so, of course, the Union Pacific did a lot of consolidating. All those streamliners that I had the pictures of, like the Los Angeles and the San Francisco and the Portland, they're all merged into one train. Some of those in summertime is 28 cars long, but it was to save money because they were losing money after the mail. So between us here, the Union Pacific, and other railroads, and Congress and everything, and that's how Amtrak was born. Now, in one of those magazines that I have, it indicates that passenger service would be gone by 1970. They only missed it 1 year. It was May 1st, 1971, when Amtrak came into service. So it's a sad day because we lost the mail service. And here's another one that I found out of a magazine, and it says, I'm going to read it because I thought it was a wonderful statement put out by the Association of American Railroads. It says, "Yes, we know that some mail moves by other forms of transportation, but every community in the United States, from the smallest hamlet to the city of New York, is served by railway mail service. The vast majority of cities and towns receive their mail by railroads direct. The others are served by railroads in combination with other forms of transportation. In the nearly 3,000 counties served directly by railroads live, over 99% of our entire population. In the few counties without railroads, less than 1%. A few counties without railroads use and benefit from railroad mail service because, accepting local pickup and delivery, most of their non-local letters and packages also travel by rail, which they did. Thus, in reality, every community and every person in the United States uses and benefits from railway mail service. That's the problem, and that's what happened to us. So there we go, and you can see in that picture, I lived in a small town in Nebraska, and I watched the postmaster take it was a first-class mail bag, locked, because it probably had some valuables in it too. So anyway, he would hang that on that mail crane. We had those at all locations, where there's a post office out in the Tules. Maybe Rock River had it, and Medicine Bow, and Hannah, and all these places. So the postmaster would go down and hang the mail bag. The train came and it had a hook that reached out, picked that bag up, and as it picked it, the postal employee kicked one off for us. So that was the one that you mailed here in Laramie at 6 o'clock this morning. That, it now arrived in Cheyenne, or might have arrived in Buford or someplace, So I mean, it was a beautiful service that we had then. It was in the mid-1950s, though, that the Postmaster General of Summerfield determined that they wanted to change to air. And of course, first-class mail was going to go by air, and bulk mail by rail. And a lot of it did go by air, and it ended up being that way. But so anyway, that was revenue that was necessary to maintain passenger service. And Union Pacific passenger train service ended on May 1st, 1971. So there's the new trains, the original Streamliner of 1934, and the later Streamliners as we saw them here. Thank you. Take questions if I can hear them.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My grandfather was an auto mechanic and actually drove through Death Valley back in the 20s. But he told me that the original rules, at least in California, were if you were driving an automobile and you came upon someone on a horse carriage, you had to disassemble your vehicle to let the horse carriage go through. Are you aware of that?
I think anything could have happened. In those early days, I've heard a lot of stories about some of the, even going up a little hill, sometimes with the Model T, they put it in reverse and back up a hill. And it's no surprise to me that probably had to take something apart. And also, I just think the best thing is this Lincoln Highway Association still exists. And if you go to a web page, you can probably get more information from the Highway Association. I'm a railroader, but I have an interest in it. But it's the main thing, the Lincoln Highway Association group, because it would have been in that time period at the beginning of automobiles, and especially 1913 when they formed, and 1926 when the government then took over the highway system, and the Lincoln Highway actually died in kind of, the official name. It became US 30 through here, and that was the system that they adopted. And so Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, some kind of crazy stuff that took place like that. So,
Anyone else?
there's one.
Did they prepare the food right on board on the train, or?
I'd say, let me hear that.
Did they prepare the food right on the train?
Did they what?
Prepare the food on?
Oh,
the
yeah,
train?
yeah, the food, oh, yes. The dining car had, it had a great big range and they had employees on there. And in Cheyenne, they had a commissary and they had a little buggy that went along and took ice, bags of ice. And they also, what they used was the pressed logs. They were about this big around and they were used in that, those ranges and so on. Later, the current on the railroad still has they're actually executive cars, and they have dining facilities on those, but now they're propane or gas. So yeah, they prepared it all. That picture of the prime rib, there's another one of them cutting it.
Wow.
Boy, that makes your mouth water. So, there's John.
John.
Yeah, I know that, Amtrak, the first go, I don't remember how long it lasted, but maybe you could tell us why it discontinued, and then some years later it came back, then
Well,
discontinued again.
Initially, Amtrak started right through Wyoming because the way it came about is that railroads were supposed to sign and agree to operate Amtrak. And the Denver and Rio Grande Western, west out of Denver, would not agree. Now, there was another railroad in the south, the Southern Railroad, did not agree either. So if you did not agree to operate Amtrak, you had to operate the train yourself, which the Rio Grande did. And the Rio Grande operated that until 1983. They started getting, there was an economic situation where there was losses for them. And at that time is about when mergers on railroads started taking place. And the business climate changed considerably. And here's the Rio Grande with a passenger train trying to merge with somebody who doesn't want one, and so on. So you can see what those executives are thinking. So they agreed in 1983 to take over Amtrak. So it left from this area and went down to Colorado. Now they brought back another one. It didn't last too long, but they brought back what was the train that the Pioneer that came through Laramie, and it was just a car or two off of the one that came into Denver. They switched those off, and they came up through here and went on over to Granger, Wyoming, which is just about 30 miles west of Green River, and went on up to Portland. They had that train for about 3 years, but Amtrak took it off because it was a low revenue producer and it was tying up a lot of equipment. Amtrak's always had, most generally, an equipment problem. And because of they could take that equipment off the Pioneer and also off of the one that went out of Salt Lake City called the Desert Wind. And all that equipment was released, then they could put it on through trains and other operations. And that's why Amtrak did that on their own. But neither one of them was really a high revenue producer for Amtrak. The Amtrak successful trains are really the ones in the east, where they have good passenger loads and so on. In fact, Amtrak they have their own ownership of trackage in some areas back east. So I hear this all the time, and we have a situation, I call it promotions, because there's deal going on right now in Colorado in the Front Range. Of course, I think eventually they will need some passenger service of some sort because of the population. It takes a population base to really make that successful. And so they're looking at from southern Colorado up to Cheyenne. Well, I have my own opinion. Sometimes, I mean, the Cheyenne thing, and I have friends in Cheyenne, they're just all excited about, we're going to get Amtrak and they're going to ride it down to Fort Collins and go shopping and blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm not so sure. First off, they'll ride it once. And what it will cost will be another thing. And I dare anybody to go shopping in Fort Collins and do what I do and go to Costco and come back with paper towels. You know, so you're still, the automobile's going to still be the number one thing. But that interstate has growing pains. They're giving it that extra lane right now on some sections there and going to put on the toll. Have you noted that if you go down that way, what that costs? You know, and the Amtrak won't be any cheaper. So it kind of makes you wonder, but the reason that they want to come to Cheyenne mostly is some kind of government, multi-state. You know, that's the promoters of it in Colorado are wanting the Wyoming thing. Well, look at it. Between Cheyenne and Wellington, there's more antelope than people. That's my thought. But you don't have to buy it if you don't want it. So, well, anyway, it's great talking to you and having such a nice turnout. Laramie has beautiful weather here today. We came over the hill and it's a little different on the other side. And it's typical. I worked here in Laramie in 1958 and I got off work at midnight and I would look to the east and up on top the summit, they had a beacon light. If I could see the beacon light, I'd go home after work. But I couldn't see the beacon light, I didn't go home. And of course, here in Wyoming, in 1953, when I started to work for the railroad, we had 11 passenger trains through Laramie each way every day. Some of them were Denver trains and the Chicago trains. So. But the automobile, the jet aircraft came in the mid-1950s. And so if you can fly from Chicago to Los Angeles in a matter of hours versus 39 3/4 hours, I know what you're going to do. And that's what happened. That's what happened to the passenger train. And the mail. All those things, one after another. So, okay, thank you very much.